These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Thom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Thom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Thom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Thom.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, I hope it's a beautiful Thursday wherever you may be. We have a huge show today. In our first hour, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by at the bottom of the hour to talk about the true unemployment rate here in the United States. And in our second hour, Congressman Pocan will be with us. Yesterday, we had to move it back to today because yesterday was the hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett to be on the Supreme Court. You know, the woman who is occupying a stolen seat on the Seventh Circuit, President Obama had nominated a brilliant African-American lawyer for that seat. And Mitch McConnell, for 2 years, refused to allow any of President Obama's judicial nominees to go through, which is why there was over 100 of them open when Trump came into office. So Mitch McConnell stole that seat, and then he gave it to Amy Coney Barrett so that she could be teed up. She was just a lawyer before this, so that she could be a lawyer who worked on Bush v. Gore at that, so that she could be teed up to, to knock this one out. Yeah, it's mind-boggling. But anyway, we did that yesterday. So today, our full second hour will be Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. And in our third hour, Monday was Native American Day, Native American History Day, or I'm not sure that's the exact title of it these days, but I mean, it used to be Columbus Day, right? We no longer call it that. And I said, toward the end of the week when we don't have these Senate confirmation hearings, We will revisit that. We have two guests in our third hour. Robin Zephier, who wrote an absolutely brilliant book. If you're watching on TV or on YouTube, you can see it over my shoulder. It's titled Warrior Is. Robin is Lakota Sioux. And Gene Schroedel. Two separate guests and two separate blocks in the third hour. Both Robin Zephier talking about his grandfather, great-grandfather, actually confronted Custer. And Gene Schroedel is going to be talking about voting in Indian country. So that's what's coming up today. There's a lot in the news. We've got now according to numerous military and former intelligence officials, a massive Russian, apparently a fairly small Russian disinformation campaign. Not even certain it came out of Russia. I mean, this might just be something that, some cranky oligarch or some, crazy guy in Rudy Giuliani's circles have come up with some forged Hunter Biden emails. I don't think this is going to work. I think that, number one, most Americans have already decided who and what and all that kind of thing. And number two, here's Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump and their criminal buddies forging emails to make a candidate's child look bad. This Hunter Biden is, the son of Joe Biden. His brother and sister were killed, and his mother were all killed in a car crash. He's struggled with drug and alcohol problems, has gone through rehab, got himself straight. And I mean, even if these emails were true, there's apparently no there there, but these are, there's every evidence that they're forged. They were on a laptop that some guy turned over to a laptop repair guy, and he just accidentally discovered them, and somehow he knew to contact Rudy Giuliani. And it's just, and keep in mind, Giuliani spent the last year with a Russian intelligence officer who's been feeding him stuff. So the story was, actually banned from Twitter for a while, but now it's getting out there. And but I think most Americans are just going to look at this with disgust. You're going after the kid of the candidate, really? I haven't heard Joe Biden talking about, the Trump children and their involvement. All three of them. Well, not Tiffany and not Barron, but Ivanka and Don Jr. and Eric, all having to take a class in how not to rip people off when you run a nonprofit charity because they are convicted of fraud. And they have to take a class. For example, it's just a starting point. Or Jared Kushner, getting Saudi Arabia to help him threaten Middle Eastern countries if they don't loan him $1 billion. It's just mind-boggling. So, I think most Americans are, and particularly Americans old enough to have children who are adults, who have struggled throughout their lives, who, thank God, our kids have made it through life pretty good. We have some very close friends who have a son who is repeatedly ending up in the hospital and in rehab facilities, and we just we can see all the pain that it's causing them, and I just don't see how Trump and Giuliani think this is going to help them in any way at all. But anyhow, scientists today, right now, are projecting 400,000 dead Americans by the end of this year from the coronavirus. And a new study was just published in the Journal of the American Medical Association yesterday, suggesting that as of August, several months ago, there were 75,000 people who died of coronavirus who were never listed as having died of coronavirus. They had heart attacks, they had strokes, they had sudden death. And when you go back and you look at what happened, they almost certainly died of coronavirus. They just never got diagnosed. So, we're saying we've got 215,000 deaths. It appears we have well over 300,000 deaths in America. And meanwhile, we're discovering that back in February, the Trump administration gave a private briefing to hedge fund guys, among others, at the conservative Hoover Institution, telling them that the economy was in big trouble and get ready because of the virus. And as a result, a bunch of millionaires and billionaires made a huge killing, while the American middle class, who got no warning at all, Trump was lying to us, we got wiped out. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting today that 8 million people have slipped into poverty in the last 7 months. And that certainly understates the depth and breadth of the problem caused by the Trump administration's failure to stop the virus in the United States. It has been stopped in Taiwan. It has been stopped in New Zealand. It has been largely stopped in Australia. It's been stopped in South Korea. But here, no. And in fact, Dr. Fauci is even saying now, because we've screwed this thing up so badly in the United States, because Trump has screwed it up so badly, we should just cancel Thanksgiving. And now the Trump administration is promoting herd immunity, and they've got this petition, this letter that they say is from 9,000 doctors around the world with a whole bunch of made-up names on it. I.M.P. Really? This is a name for a doctor? It's insane. And this letter is openly calling for herd immunity. Yes, let's get 70% of Americans infected. Let's kill 6 million Americans. And then how long will that immunity last? We don't know. Might just be until the next season, just like flu and the common cold. You know, the Republicans have a long history of ignoring public health crises. They ignored the tobacco crisis for years and years. In 2000, Mike Pence even wrote an op-ed saying tobacco doesn't cause a cancer. They've ridiculed, denied, ignored that human activity is causing, burning fossil fuels is causing global warming. Even Judge Barrett yesterday was like, well, I don't know. Her father, by the way, has spent most of his lifetime as a lawyer for Shell Oil, which has a case before the Supreme Court involving global warming in a month or two. I'm astonished nobody brought that up. They were so, let's handle her with kid gloves. Let's not talk about this cult that she's in. It's just mind-boggling. They've been gutting regulatory agencies. They're before the Supreme Court saying do away with pre-existing protections, pre-existing condition protections. The Republican Party, let's call it what it is. It's a death cult. Picking up your calls after this. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
8 million people have slid into poverty in the United States since May because of the incompetence of the Trump administration, or the malice. And welcome back. Bill in Casadero, California. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Just calling you some ideas about COVID that I've seen in the media, and I'm amazed that the government or Biden or somebody hasn't picked up on this and tried to implement or at least investigate. And that is, one, is that dogs can be trained to sniff out the COVID-19 virus, about at 94%.
Yeah, the Dutch are doing this.
Accuracy rate. And I was hoping that, and also it can be detected in sewage. And I thought if they combine the two ideas together, they could locate areas where there are infections, use the dogs to sniff out households that are infected, and put them into isolation. And
Bill, here's why that's not being discussed in the United States. That would work if you had most of the population not having COVID-19 and the occasional, pocket popping up like they have in Holland right now. And that's where they're doing this. But here, 10% of the U.S. population has been exposed to this disease now because of the incompetence of the Trump administration. You could test sewage and see where these things are exploited, but there's no response to it.
Yeah, I know. I've written numerous. I've contacted so many health officials, people that are on TV and such, and they say interesting, and I hear nothing back.
Yeah, because yes, you can find, if we're able to find people who are infected. Well, in Wisconsin right now, they've got a case. What's the word for when? When the percentage of people who show up to be tested. You want to keep who test positive. You want to keep that percentage. The positivity ratio or rate, I guess it's called. You want to keep that below 5%. That means that you're testing enough people that you're actually starting to catch the virus. It's over 20% in Wisconsin right now. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's other data that can be pulled in, but, what good is it going to do in these kind of situations? Steve in Topanga, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I was just thinking that, Trump might steal the election through the Electoral College. And nothing really we can do about that. But, nominee for the Supreme Court. Huh?
He already did that once. I mean, it was the Electoral College loophole that put him in the White House 4 years ago.
Exactly. So my proposal is we should concentrate on the House and Senate races because it can't be stolen like the Electoral College. And as far as a nominee for the Supreme Court, that's a done deal. But if we lose the House and Senate, we're really in a big trouble. And I think that all the other stuff is just smokescreen, keep us from concentrating on the House and Senate. And that's what I'd like.
I think we could chew gum and walk at the same time. Hopefully my ballot will arrive soon. I think here in Oregon they mailed them yesterday. We got our voter guides a couple days ago. I will not just vote for the president. I'll vote for
Oh yeah. And we're dropping ours. We've got ours. We're here in California and got ours already, and we're going to drop them off today. My brother and I. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. And
okay, Steve.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Talk to you soon.
Be sure your ballot doesn't go in one of those Republican phony baloney drop boxes. It's amazing. The Republican Party in California is putting out phony drop boxes for people to put their ballots in, presumably mostly in Democratic areas. And if the Democrats were doing this, the Republicans would be screaming, they're going to steal your vote. They're going to throw it in the trash. The Democrats are saying, well, we don't think this is legal. This is not a good idea. Come on, guys. We will be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. For our video this week, for supporters of our program, you can find it over at thomhartmann.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. This is... in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost a third of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. By the way, this afternoon, about a half hour after I get off the air, it'll be 3:30 Eastern Time, 12:30 Pacific Time, David Korten, who is the New York Times bestselling author and former, I believe, Harvard School of Economics professor. He wrote When Corporations Rule the World, among other major books. He and I are going to be in a conversation on a webinar about my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. And we're going to get into some stuff that David and I haven't gotten into before in public, and that a lot of it, I only occasionally or rarely talk about here. I think you're going to find it absolutely fascinating. So check that out. You can get information on how to find it over at thomhartmann.com or on our Facebook page. So, Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind?
I hear a lot of talk bandied about by the Republicans about constitutional originalism. Isn't that just fancy talk for what the white man said in 1787?
That's exactly what it is. And by the way... Off the air. Okay, thank you, Brad. Yeah, and in 1789 actually was the year that, 1787 was the year the Constitution was written, 1789 was the year it was ratified, and we officially became a republic. And in 1789, abortions were advertised in the newspaper. They didn't use the word abortion, but, you know, everybody knew what it was, and they were advertised in the newspaper. The word privacy meant use the toilet, so you don't find, thus privies. Thus, you don't find that word in the Constitution, but the Fourth Amendment is all about it. But, you know, Scalia would tell you that that word isn't there. In fact, did tell you that. Guns were rare. They were very expensive. And most cities heavily regulated guns. You know, 100 years later, it was still the case. Tombstone, Arizona, you know, you had to leave your gun with a sheriff when you came into town, famously, you know. American towns have been regulated. So, you know, when this country was founded, and slavery was legal. So when this country was founded, things were very different than they are today. And any judge who tells you that they are an originalist and therefore they are reading the Constitution through the mind or eyes of either the people who wrote it, who had wild disagreements about its meaning, or through the eyes of, as Amy Coney Barrett said the other day, the people at the time, the general understanding at the time. Anybody who tells you that is trying to feed you a load of horse crap. I mean, you know, there's just no other way to say it. This is like a religion. It's like priests saying, well, we know what God says and we know how to correctly interpret the Bible. And what's happened is that the Supreme Court has seized so much power for itself and it's gotten so bizarre over the last couple of decades that they've had to resort to using religion, not any official religion, the religion of the court, to say, oh yeah, we're doing the same thing that priests do. We can divine the mind of God, and we can read the old sacred texts, in this case the Constitution, and tell you exactly what they mean. It's a scam. Originalism is a scam, period, full stop. Carl in Crawfordsville, Indiana. Hey, Carl, what's up?
I was wondering if you can pack a court. Can you demote a judge in the Supreme Court to another federal court lower down?
Yes, you can. And this is the essence of Elizabeth Warren's proposal for term limits in the Supreme Court. The Constitution says that all federal judges have lifetime tenure. It does not say that only Supreme Court justices do. And so you've got lifetime, and it doesn't talk at all about moving people between courts. So Congress, Article 3, Section 2, Congress can regulate the Supreme Court. In fact, it must regulate the Supreme Court. Congress literally created the Supreme Court, or you know, in its current form, decided how many members were on it, decided where they meet, defines its budget and everything else. So Congress can say, you know, after 18 years on the court or 15 years on the court, you get to go back to being a member of the Fourth Circuit or the Seventh Circuit or whatever it may be. So, yes, absolutely. Carl, thanks for the call. Wayne in Kingston, New York. Hey, Wayne, what's up? Got just a minute to the break, Wayne. A quick one.
Okay, yeah. So, you know, I just wanted to point out, again, like everybody else, the hypocrisy of the Republican Party. Trump is going for herd immunity, like you said.
Right.
But they like to scream all lives matter, and we all know it's just a nasty retort to us singing Black Lives Matter. So if you're going for herd immunity, millions are going to die. What happened to all lives matter? And that's all I got for you.
Well, there was somebody, I don't recall where I read it this morning, who was calling the herd immunity strategy a reinvention of the eugenics strategy of the 1920s. The whole idea of eugenics was either sterilize or kill off the people who are, quote, genetically inferior, end quote, and which included people who were mentally retarded or you know, and people of color. And you know, what's going to happen here with herd immunity is, you know, African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans are going to die in much larger numbers than white people, and elderly people are going to die. So I think you could even call it eugenics, Wayne. I mean, that's how vicious this whole thing is. It's just over the top. Wayne, thank you. Excellent point. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes after the hour. Richard Wolff will be with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Excuse me, I should say Professor Richard Wolff will be with us in a moment. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate 1980 in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. "He does not want this cash," the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Coke's products without ever seeing Coke's name attached. Coke refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Coke is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Coke Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland, by Christopher Leonard. On the Science Revolution, Dr. Justin Frank drops by on the current assessment of Trump's mental state. Meteorologist Dr. Jeff Masters will tell us about 2020's record-breaking hurricane season and how a hurricane can go from 40 to 110 miles an hour in just 24 hours. Tanya Sanarab from the Center for Biological Diversity is reporting on how massive wildlife imports are upping our future pandemic risk. Dr. Sam Metz is here on Medicare for All. He confirms a single payer provides better care for less money. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So a couple of days ago, Felix Salmon over at Axios.com published this piece, America's True Unemployment Rate. And Felix says if a person who is looking for a full-time job that pays a living wage but can't find one is the definition of unemployed, then 26% of Americans are unemployed. If you measure unemployment as anybody over 16 years old who isn't earning a living wage, we have 54.6% unemployment in the United States. For Black Americans, 59.2% of Americans are unemployed. The official unemployment rate is 3.6%. What is going on here? This makes no sense at all. On the line with us is our old friend, Professor Richard Wolff. He's an economist, a professor of economics, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author of numerous books. His latest, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. He's the founder of democracyatwork.info and his website, rdwolff.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, and PROF, Professor Wolff, welcome back. Tell me, I know that we've discussed unemployment before, but I'd like to do a deep dive here. What's the history of this? How did we get to this point? And how is it possible that we have these low unemployment rates here in the United States?
Well, it's crystal clear to most of us watching that what began as a fairly technical debate among a few of the people, mostly in and around the Labor Department, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a debate about how best to measure unemployment, which is a difficult topic, and there are legitimate differences in how to count it. That was quickly overtaken by political interests. Usually the government in power doing everything it can to lean on the statisticians to come up with the smallest possible number, and those out of power hoping to get in, pushing for the reverse, that is, to count all the people that you could legitimately claim. And what you see in that Axios article is what the result is, namely, depending on how you choose to count what you think is important, you come up with extraordinarily different numbers. As little as, single-digit unemployment, which is what the Trump administration, for example, now uses, with an awful lot of media following suit, or any one of half a dozen alternative measures. It has even gotten to the point where it's so acrimonious that the Bureau of Labor Statistics issues a whole raft of unemployment numbers, not just one. There's U1, it's called U2, U5, U6. There's a whole bunch of them, and they vary quite significantly because their definitions are, in fact, different. Bottom line, if you use the Axios article, and it's a very good article, by the way, if you use it, you will get a real grasp on what should be clear to Americans, which is if by unemployment you mean people who are unable to get a decent full-time job at something more than, I don't know, $20,000, $25,000 a year to live on, if that's your measure of who's unemployed, then half of Americans looking for work, in fact, can't get that kind of job. And if you add to that the people that aren't looking anymore, well, you're talking about an economic system that has failed. The job of an economic system is to give people work at decent income, just like it's the job of an economic system to be prepared for a virus that we know is coming at any time. And we live in a system that is failing on both counts.
So in the 1930s, the unemployment rate was somewhere between 25 and 35% at various points, as I recall. How differently was that measured then versus now? And how close, in your mind, are we to the actual unemployment rates we saw in the 1930s? I mean, we've got 8 million people. The New York Times had a piece this morning. 8 million people have slid into poverty just since May in America. That's pretty scary. I mean, we've got a huge eviction crisis looming on the horizon. It seems to me like we're in Great Depression territory, but that's certainly not the message that the Republicans, the Trump administration, and sadly the media are putting out.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm really upset by it because I deal with it almost every day with these questions. Let's start quickly. The official rate in the depths of the Depression, so that would be 1933. The peak of unemployment was listed and is usually carried in history books as 25%. So roughly 1 in 4 Americans in the labor force at that time were unemployed, which means that literally every family in the United States had somebody, father, mother, cousin, uncle, somebody unemployed, often more than one, which meant that those who were still employed had to share their income and their livelihood expenses with those who weren't. Remember, at this time, we didn't have unemployment insurance or Social Security. The difficulty for the American people, unspeakable if we look back. I would argue that today we have levels of unemployment that are at least as bad as the Great Depression. And I say that only because so many other economic indicators indicate that we are at or beyond the level of crash that we had in the 1930s. Therefore, I would tilt on those grounds towards the higher end of what's happening. And if you look at who's caught in it, black and brown people, who are now a significantly larger part of our population than they were in the 1930s, are suffering the disproportionate impact of all of this. If you add that we have interrupted schooling in a way we did not in the 1930s, well, then the deep scars of this collapse and the implications of the failure to be prepared for the virus or to contain it are going to be hurting us as a people and a nation for a long time, just as the Great Depression shaped most of the rest of the 20th century's economics and politics. I think what we're going through now will do the same.
In the Washington Post today, Greg Sargent, I believe it was, although I may have that wrong, it was one of the regular columnists, was writing how Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate have largely given up on any idea of governing next year. that they can see the handwriting on the wall. They think the Republicans are going to lose the Senate. They've already lost the House, and they're definitely going to lose the White House. And therefore, what they are doing is busily running around Washington, D.C., metaphorically speaking, and putting landmines everywhere they can so that when the Biden administration, comes in on January 20th, they will be presented with horrible, absolutely horrible economic circumstances, and they will be restrained in their ability to do anything about it. They're already starting to scream about budget deficits, something that Republicans always talk about when Democrats come into office. How much damage can they do, and how long might it take to recover from that kind of damage?
Very difficult, a good question, but very difficult to answer. And the reason has to be hammered home here. The United States is not the dominant player in the world today the way it has been for most of the last 75 years. And that reality has not yet sunk in. The desperate effort of the Trump and Republican administrations to shift from a globalization approach to a nationalism, that's the desperate effort of people, doing that famous thing of closing the barn door after all the animals have gotten out. It's not working. It hasn't worked. We haven't revived manufacturing. We haven't changed our deficits with international trade or even with China after all of the political theater. I think what you're seeing is hinted to us by what the Republicans said when Obama won in 2008. Namely, they're going to do everything they can to make his presidency a failure in order to then run on the grounds that he failed and get themselves into office, which is pretty much what they did or tried to do, and I think they're just following that playbook. Having said that, Mr. Biden and Kamala Harris are going to have quite the difficulty. Whatever amount of blame you want to put on the Republicans and Trump, and they deserve everything you put on them, the reality is our problems are into a system that is going to be a very big problem for a new administration, no matter how successful their landmines.
Yeah, and the sabotage efforts are apparently just going into high gear, and they'll redouble after during the lame duck apparently. Professor Richard Wolff, his latest book, The Sickness is the System, Democracy at Work.info. Professor Wolff, thanks for dropping by.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour, we'll be back. I'll pick up your phone calls, and then at the top of the next hour, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the hour taking your calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Gary in Naples, Florida, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello, Mr. Thom Hartmann. It's been a while.
Hey, Gary. Greed has no heart. How are you?
Greed has no heart ever. Thank you. I miss you. I miss you, Tom. I've been, anyway, it's not about me. It's about America, a country that you love so much. Keep up your great work. I want to preface my remarks. I'll make it as quick as possible. What I like, and please, in all due humility, you understand, you would make a better one than me, but men like, we would be a great advisor to President Biden. We would. And because one word, greed, I understand greed. Let me ask you this. Do you think I may understand entrenched greed more than anybody in America right now? Am I one of them?
You've been talking about it on this program for a decade.
Well, you just answered it, didn't you? You answered it perfectly, as you always do. Greed has no heart. It's the real cancer in America. Sure, the virus is a killer, and we're disgusted with our fellow Americans that are just bringing it on even more. But having said that, I want to throw this point at you very quick, and I want because I trust your judgment. Here's my view, and what's really, really bothersome to me. Sure, greed, entrenched greed, it's a cancer. But men such as you, and maybe me, and other good men, honest men, we're not that relevant anymore, Tom. We're not that relevant anymore. That's wrong. You see my point? That is wrong.
I don't.
You understand what I'm saying?
Gary, men, particularly white men, still basically control all the levers of power in this country. I don't think that should be. I think we should have more diversity. But to say that white men are irrelevant. Okay, what's your point?
Do you think I have a point?
I don't. If you do, I don't understand it.
You don't understand. Men, common men. We want men. Let me point this out to you, if I may. Men inherently like to solve problems. Would you agree with that? Isn't that who we are?
I think that's a human characteristic, Gary. I don't think it's gender specific.
That's right. You're right. Okay, that's a human characteristic. I think it's more towards men.
And, increasingly we're seeing women. I think that women have been blocked out of things like science and math, not because of any inherent capabilities or proclivities, but rather because those have been the fields that have the best pay and the most power, and men have, for millennia, since the dawn of the agricultural revolution, have fought to keep women basically in the role of herd animals. Go ahead.
Only you can educate me on that, and I agree with you. And in closing, I just believe men such as you, maybe me, are a dying breed, Thom Hartmann, and that's wrong.
Well,
and we have to get out there and vote.
Yeah, if you're talking about men who get it, I think
Thom Hartmann.
Actually, no, I think it's the other way around, Gary. I really do. I think that you've got a whole generation of young men coming up who have respect for women and view and not just women, across the spectrum of gender identity.
Reality is a tough card in the deck.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Gary, thank you for the call. I do. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you in the middle of the sentence. There's a little bit of latency there. So between the time I do something and the time I hear it, slight delay. My apologies, Gary. We'll be right back. David Korten, the guy who wrote When Corporations Rule the World. David and I will be having a webinar conversation on October 15th from 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern Time about my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. Check it out. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation we're going to have. More information is available at thomhartmann.com and on our Facebook page. Hey, thanks so much for supporting our program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com. Or there's a link to it at thomhartmann.com for the people who do support our program, and it's about how these writers, Foe and Monk, in the Journal of Democracy have documented how over the last 40 years or so, Americans have gone from a very small little trickle of Americans saying, yes, we'd like a strongman leader who doesn't have to answer to Congress, to that number being 49% last year. And the reason for this appears to be that the rich have been massively ripping off the country and doing so in part by controlling our political structures. And everyday people know this. Now, there are remedies for this. There are numerous solutions for this. But we really first have to understand how much damage, real damage, this is doing to the United States of America. It's all over that video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Michael in Long Island City. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Tom, listen to your show all the time. It's great, good source of information. Please keep up the good work. I have a crazy idea. I'm going to be quick. It relates to the Senate. Rather than to have just two senators from a state, why not have one senator per party, meaning one for a Democrat, one for Republican, and independent senator. And that way you can either get, when there are major decisions, you can get, a 3-0 vote, a 2-1 vote, things of that nature.
I get what you're saying, and I know the direction you're moving, Michael, is to get a Senate that's more representative of America, and I salute that goal. I think probably a better way to get there would be either to, if we're going to do constitutional amendments, for example, which is what that would require, would be to make the Senate, like the House of Representatives is, proportional to the population of the state. So California, with I think 34 million people, might get, and versus Wyoming with fewer than 1 million people. California would get 34 senators and Wyoming would get 1. It's unlikely that we're going to get that far, but proportional representation is a really good idea, and I think that that would be to make the Senate more representative. The fact of the matter is, the Democrats in the United States Senate were elected by 40 million more people than were the Republicans in the United States Senate. Yet Republicans control the Senate because of all these small, low population, high Fox News viewing states. And another way to deal with that, another way to solve that problem, as it were, would be to have the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico be admitted as states. That would add 4 probably Democratic senators to the Senate, which would restore a lot of balance. And another possibility is having California break up into 2 or 3 states, and New York, for that matter, have New York City and environs split off from New York State and become its own state. I doubt any of those things are going to happen any day soon, but those would be the directions that I would move to get what you're talking about done. Michael, keep thinking. That's I love your goals. Jim in Vieira, Florida. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Yeah, hello, Tom. Longtime listener, and thank you for everything you do. I'll try to keep this as quick as possible. My thought is a subject that's been passed around over the last few weeks about the possibility that the election could get thrown into the House of Representatives. And right now it looks like it's 26-24 or maybe 26-22 states with 2 tied, but I don't know which ones are tied. I've looked at this. It looks to me like it's more like 26-24. But the question is, if some state decides to elect their own slate of unfaithful electors, would Nancy Pelosi have the power to refuse to seat that state's delegation until the dispute was settled? Such as Mitch McConnell did to Al Franken, by the way. When the election was in dispute in Minnesota, he refused to seat him. I think it was nearly 6 months.
Yeah. That was post-election, and I don't think that Al Franken was contesting that. I think they were just holding that seat until the election was decided. But number one, the House delegations, each state's House delegation has 1 vote, but that 1 vote is not decided by that House delegation. And I keep seeing people in the media making this mistake. That House delegation is directed in how to vote by the House and Senate in their state, or if they call it an assembly or a House of Burgesses or whatever it may be, but by the legislators of their state. And I think we have more than 26 states that have their legislatures a majority Republican right now. But in either case, having Nancy Pelosi block things is not a way around it. It ain't going to happen. Thanks for the call, Jim. Bruce in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Bruce, got a minute to the break. What's up?
I'm going to assert that herd immunity is impossible to achieve. The underlying assumptions of 70% contamination is not enough. The underlying assumption that immunity is long-term is also probably not true. But if you go with those assumptions, herd immunity would take about 3.5 years, maybe a little more, with an accompanying death rate of about 100,000 per every 4 months. Maybe higher. Yeah, I agree. And the numbers I was using for herd immunity yesterday were 70%. For measles, we know that you have to have a 94% level of herd immunity. In other words, 94% of the population has to be vaccinated for measles. Now, measles is much more contagious than coronavirus, but it's spread in a very similar fashion, Right, but the contagion rate dictates the percentage of the population that has to be infected. I think 70% is too low because of the contagion.
It may well be. There's still a lot we don't know, Bruce, but I'm with you. This whole idea of herd immunity that Donald Trump and Scott Atlas, the radiologist, the Fox News radiologist who is now running, apparently, our entire national strategy with regard to this is nuts.
Up next, Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Boll and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour. We've moved middays with Mark from yesterday to today because of the hearings in the Supreme Court. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov is his website. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And with us for the hour, our telephone number 202-808-9925 if you have any questions for Congressman Pocan. Congressman, welcome back. What's on your mind and what's on your agenda this week?
Well, Tom, thanks again for having me. A few things. One, we're watching the Supreme Court being packed by the Republicans once again, especially after an election started and after they all said how awful it was to do in the final year of someone's term as president. Here they are in the final days of someone's term as president, trying to move forward to justice. The election, looking at the polls and looking at our swing states, looking good if we get our voters out. But also trying to get a final COVID package through. And I think there's been some pretty strong misinformation, including, from people on our side of the aisle. And, we want to get this done, but we need a White House and a Senate to work with us. And I think everyone knows we passed a bill back in May. We passed another bill a few weeks ago, but the White House and the Senate aren't real serious about helping America's families. And we've got to get that done. It's crucial for people who are unemployed, for small business owners needing help, for our frontline workers, for our state and local governments doing all the testing and contact tracing. So lots going on, to be real honest.
The Washington Post is reporting this morning that the Republicans, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate, have concluded that they probably will not be holding power after the election. And therefore, they're doing everything they can to blow up the economy, and will continue throughout the lame duck session. And Trump is doing everything he can to infect as many Americans as possible, so that when Joe Biden comes into office, getting the coronavirus under control will be a nearly impossible task, and doing anything about the economy will be extremely difficult. They're already hysterically screaming, or starting to, about budget deficits. What can you guys do to head that stuff off?
Well, one, we can be unified in that we actually know the facts and we're sharing them with the public, right, on what's happening. For example, on the COVID package, yes, they have a dollar amount that sounds like a substantial amount of money, and they're dangling a little, shiny hook in front of us, but there's not a whole lot on that hook. And when you talk to Speaker Pelosi, we had an hour yesterday with her, those of us who co-chair the various values-based and identity-based caucuses in Congress, you start to find out why it's such a bad deal and what is happening, and that they're not bargaining in good faith. I think you've probably heard Nancy Pelosi say, they'll take one step forward then two back. And they're doing that. They don't really understand the health aspects of it. All they understand is Donald Trump wants another $1,200 check that he can put his name on, right? And when it comes to specifics, they'll agree to something, and then the next day take that out of the agreement, and it's like you're bargaining with someone who has no intention of doing anything right. So I think that observation is correct, and we're trying to let people know that we've passed several times measures to try to provide some relief. But I do think that there are some things that we can do. Still, we have a chance on December 11th when we have a continuing resolution run-up. There's a good chance you can do things there, because at that point, when Donald Trump loses, Republicans are going to have to decide who wants to be in charge of the Republican Party, because their cult leader just left. And I think there's some opportunities. And more importantly, we're going to do things, I think, like a big infrastructure package early next year, because we have to, and help the economy. So I think there are still things that we're going to be able to do. It's just, you're absolutely right. We've got some very unwilling folks on the other side of the aisle. And I think folks on our side of the aisle got to get the facts before they decide to tweet or text.
Yeah, I would take it beyond unwilling. I'd say it's bad faith. I mean, this, when President Obama was elected president, I believe it was Mitch McConnell said, I'm devoting all my efforts to making him a one-term president. Rush Limbaugh came out and said, all the Republicans, we want him to fail. We're going to do everything we can to make him fail. And the successes that he had, Trump has been one by one undoing to try to erase, from history, in Trump's mind, in my opinion, anything about the first black president in this country. But enough of my pontifications. Unless you want to respond to that, should we pick up some phone calls?
Well, sure. I would just say, I think if we can pick up the House and the Senate and the White House, which is starting to look potentially like it's possible, especially if people get out to vote, and that's the absolute key part of it all, then we've got a lot more ability to do some things early into next year. So even though I agree with everything you said as far as the dysfunction they're creating and trying to create, I still think we might have a few doors that we can open to help the people.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Rick, in Syracuse, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. How you doing, sir? My concern is because Trump has put a bunch of people in the court, and this lady that she's going to be nominated as Supreme Court. I think they're going to, maybe it's me, but I think they might want to go after the 14th Amendment, because I thought she wrote a paper about the 14th Amendment. It was not legal to be brought in the Constitution because there was only one party. Am I right? I think they might bring back not slavery type, but the type that if you were not white or if you're not this type of person, you are not legal to stay in the United States, or you are less that will take people's right to be born or to live in the state.
So, Rick, what's your question?
My question is, can they do that with all the judges?
And I got it. And Congressman Pocan, just FYI for the background on that, I was reporting yesterday, twice Amy Coney Barrett has referred to the 14th Amendment as possibly illegitimate, her phrase. And this is a jurisprudence, this is an ideology that goes back to the lost cause, that because the Confederate states did not have their senators or their members of the House seated when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed, therefore they're not legitimate, and they could be ignored by the courts or they could even be overthrown. What do you think?
Yeah, so I did hear you make that case yesterday, so that's why I am familiar with what you're saying on it. I think my answer to Rick would be, first of all, there has to be a suit. The court just can't do something. There has to be a lawsuit brought, has to make it to the Supreme Court. There's an amount of time that would have to happen on anything. But, I think it's important, Rick, that everyone understands they're the ones who are packing the Supreme Court, right? They're trying to put us in this place of having to say, would we change the makeup of the court, because they think there's some magic they're going to win out of that answer if we say a certain thing hypothetically. But the reality, not the hypothetical reality, is that they have been packing the court. They didn't allow Barack Obama a pick in his final year as a president. They are packing it right now with a justice, even though we started voting 10 days into this process. So I think that's important to let people know that ideologically it is the Republicans that are packing the court. Now, if they are successful, and I think the Senate is still trying everything they can to try to stop that, although I think, this week went pretty smooth for the Republicans in advancing their nominee. I think then, we're going to have a lot of other conversations about what needs to happen next. But, this is the problem of elections having consequences, right? And so in the final 19 days, as we talk to people about voting, elections have consequences. And right now, the Supreme Court has been the most affected by Donald Trump of any, I think, Tom, maybe any president, but for sure any modern president in putting nominees forward and getting them confirmed.
Any four-year president, yeah, any one-term president. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And he has placed over a quarter of all the judges on the federal courts and will have placed a third of all the judges on the Supreme Court. That's a huge footprint. That's
a reality show star.
Congressman Mark Pocan.
Great.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Middays with Mark, Thursday edition, second hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Bert in Groveland, California. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
This is something that happened in reference to the Kavanaugh hearings. During a break, Cornyn, Cruz, and Graham stayed in the room, and you could tell they were agitated. So as soon as the recess ended, Graham launched into a rant about how Kavanaugh's life was being destroyed, and Cruz and Cornyn joined in at some point during that, and they attacked the two women. The woman from outside who had been appointed to do the questioning, they dismissed her immediately, and then they went after the woman who was accusing Kavanaugh. So I've never heard this mentioned. I watched it on C-SPAN. C-SPAN kept the cameras on. So this morning, Graham and Cruz and Hawley were talking before it started, and evidently they're agitated about a story in the Washington Post about the Biden son and the connections with China and allegations of millions of dollars. So Graham.
So, Bert, what's your question?
Went into the hall. Well, my question is, shouldn't the Democrats know about this and bring this up at some point, that these things, it's a sham. These people have colluded to get their way however it takes to get it.
Okay, Bert, thank
well,
you.
I think that's happening, Bert. Yeah, I think that's happening, right? I mean, I think the message we really need to be talking about is that they're the ones packing the court right now, right? They didn't allow Barack Obama in his final year to have a nominee. Here they are 10 days into an election in the final months, going against everything that they all said 4 years ago, trying to put someone through in middle of COVID, in middle of a dangerous time for the Senate and staff to be in working, given how many senators were testing positive, as well as White House officials, all from a super spreader event around the nominee. I mean, there's enough red flags here that people should be operating differently, and they're not. So, I mean, I think we just have to really stress that they're the ones who are trying to unjustly affect the court. And I think the more we do that, I think the better we provide the service. And then we also mentioned that in the next month, they're going to be hearing the Affordable Care Act. So we could lose pre-existing conditions. We could lose marriage equality. We could lose the right for a woman to make decisions about her own body, all decisions that were made by a single vote in the court. So I think we just stay on that. They're going to talk about Hunter. They're going to talk about space aliens. They're going to talk about whatever they think they need to talk about to distract people from what's going on with COVID and the economy and people's health because of it. But I think when it comes to the court, we need to be real blunt about what they're doing. They're packing the court.
Yeah. Do you think this is a done deal, Amy Barrett?
I think it's going to be very difficult to stop, Tom. I really don't know how they're going to do it.
Yeah, my sense too. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast, 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. In our special video for supporters of our program, people who sign up over at thomhartmann.com, this week it's the story of what the rich libertarian billionaires who have been funding the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party for, well, in a big way since the election of Ronald Reagan for the last 40 years, and have succeeded by owning politicians and owning the Republican Party in preventing us from even getting a public option, much less a national health care system. What they are doing, what their answer is, what their response is to the question, what do we do when things really go bad? When the economy's falling apart, when epidemic disease is sweeping the country, what do we do? Well, it turns out they've got an answer. It's just not an answer for all the rest of us. They're getting in their private jets and heading off to their private little bunkers. Seriously, that's what they're up to. So I lay out the whole story, complete with details and names, over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Thanks so much. Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. And let's see here, Connie in Buffalo, New York. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. Well, you already answered the first one question that I had was about the Supreme Court adding people. I really feel we have no choice. But so I'm going to change my question a little bit. What about following through on term limits? If we could, because we have courts. They pack so many courts, and it's quite obvious that they're the ones packing the courts, I've got to say. I don't know if anybody can't see that. They're not looking. But
I think it's a valid question, Connie, and I think, Ro Khanna has introduced a bill to do that. I don't think it solves any of our immediate problems, given that it's an 18-year term limit. I mean, in a couple decades, we can see if it's a good idea or not. But right now, I think, the real question is if they've been packing the court like they have, what alternatives do we have then to make sure that, we have a court that's going to work for the people and not just for the special interests and the privilege? And I think there are other questions out there that people really need to talk about, like is the size of the court the correct size and other things that could have a much quicker resolution to some of the issues. So I just think, let's watch what happens, and if they decide to push this thing through literally days before the election, and it's their last gasp, as Tom and I were talking about earlier, if they lose the Senate after November 3rd, then we're going to have all sorts of conversations. Term limits is one possible solution. The problem is it's a several decade down the road solution.
Tim in Shelby Township, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, gentlemen. Are there any plans right after the election, before the end of the year, of starting any impeachment, specifically of William Barr or maybe even Kavanaugh?
Yeah, so I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, so maybe they've had some conversations, but as a caucus, we have not. We are laser focused right now on trying to get a COVID relief bill and getting up to the November 3rd election. A lot of us who are progressive, working with a lot of our outside progressive organizational partners, are also trying to keep a very strong focus on starting November 4th, getting good people into a Biden administration. Should he win, what we don't want to happen is to have a bunch of Wall Street folks and folks like that, because then we're going to have a hard time getting a lot of things done in the next 4 years. So I don't know if there's been a lot of conversations about impeachment processes. And my guess is if everything does change come November 3rd, there's not a lot of reason to have us in session, because everything will be changing in January. We can move a very different agenda forward.
Brant in Newcastle, Wyoming. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Minute and a half to the break.
Oh, Congressman, I'm just wondering if the House might consider a standalone bill for relief checks to the citizens.
Are you talking about the $1,200 type check? Is that the relief you're talking about?
I'm sorry, I dropped him, but I think he means either that or $600 a week or whatever it may be. But yeah.
Gotcha. I mean, the problem is, if we do the $1,200 checks for people, that may help for the short term, but what about people who don't have eviction protection? What about our frontline workers not having worker protections? What about not getting money for testing and contact tracing? Because if we don't have that, like Tom said, we're going to have even a bigger problem to take care of in that next administration. There's a lot of things that are important. We did the CARES Act together in a bipartisan way and did a lot of different things. We should be able to do that again as a Congress. Donald Trump, the only thing he cares about is his name on a check going out, and because of that, we have some leverage. But we've got to get it right. It's not just about a dollar amount. It's what is in the deal that matters. And I think you have to give those of us who are in elected office maybe a little trust that we're watching that real closely, because I think if we took the wrong deal, boy, you could have a lot of evictions, you could have a lot of people hurting, and then there won't be another package coming very quickly.
There you go. I misread my time cue, and we now have a minute and 15 seconds. Kurt in Auburn, Michigan. You got a quick one for Congressman Pocan?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Quick question, please.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put Kurt on hold. Let's try. Well, actually, it's not fair to bring somebody in with 45 seconds. So, Congressman, how do you think this is going to play out? I mean, is this more of the Republican strategy of trying to cause as much pain as possible for Joe Biden to inherit?
I think that's probably some part of it, but I also think they're just trying to, Donald Trump is all about chaos, right? So if you agree to something with us, so you take $100 billion, we agree to go down to $50 billion with language that makes $50 billion still work, and then the next day, after you agreed to that, you take away the language. That's not operating in good faith, and that's what they're doing right now. So I think Nancy's, fighting hard to get things done. They're going to help as many people as possible, including small business owners and restaurants, including other folks that aren't included right now. The EITC that wasn't included affects a lot of low-income families with kids. she's fighting for the best deal we can get. And I don't know if they're ultimately serious, but I think she's doing the right thing.
Great. Thank you. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be back on the other side of this break at the bottom of the hour with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Stick around. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Pocan's website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, It also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had kings' subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
A webinar conversation on October 15th from 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern Time about my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. Check it out. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation we're going to have. More information is available at thomhartmann.com and on our Facebook page.
Hey, we've got a new video up for our supporters, for the people who support our program directly. It's over, you can find the link to it over at thomhartmann.com. And basically it's about all these free browser extensions. There's just like a million, probably literally, I don't know the actual number, but all these browser extensions out there that do ad blocking and all, automatically zoom pictures and all kinds of cool stuff, that are actually monitoring literally every website you go to and what is on that website. They can do anything from reading your passwords to reading your bank data if they choose to. And we give them routinely permission to do this. There are ways around this and there's ways to avoid it, but just like waking up to this, pretty important stuff. So check it out. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. It's our newest rant for the week, our weekly rant just for the people who are supporters of our program. Available over at thomhartmann.com, so check it out. Thank you.
Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Glenn, is it Kalama, Washington?
Welcome back,
Glenn?
Mark Pocan.
Oh, no, Glenn. Okay, that's 2 strikes for Glenn. Sharon in Texarkana, Arkansas. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Yes, this is. I was calling to see why is Republican is so hell bent on this Amy Barrett thing when half of the people that I see in my community are starving, do not have any type of financial aid to stop them from being evicted out of their homes and stuff. And the Republican is so worried about this woman. Tell them, get up. I wish I could figure out a way to ask the public who is really worried about Amy Barrett, the public or the Republicans. I wish I could get that out to the public. Could you tell me?
Well, I think you just did, Sharon. Let's see what Congressman Pocan has to say about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head when you said, who do they represent? I don't think they consider their constituents if you're in Congress, the 700,000 plus people in your district, or if you're a senator, the people in your state, I think they consider their constituents their donors, the special interests, the well-heeled, the folks that fund their campaigns, because obviously it doesn't make sense. So many of their decisions, to try to take away pre-existing condition coverage for health insurance, who does that benefit? But big insurance and some of the medical industry, right? I mean, so that's the inherent problem. They don't consider constituents the people who live in their districts. They consider the special interests who fund their campaigns. And because of that, we have much of the problems that we have in Washington. So, this is our chance on November 3rd in 19 days to turn that around. And in states where they can unelect, some of these folks, we'll have a chance to have a democracy where we can try to represent our constituents the very best. But I think you hit your nail on the head when you asked who do they represent, because that's the problem.
Stanley in Westchester, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon, Congressman. Congressman, I have a major concern. Is there any planned action should Donald Trump refuse to leave the White House and those militias start up? Because they are saying that they're going to have a race riot or a civil war in this country if Donald Trump does not win the election. I'm getting more and more notifications of this on social media, and I want to find, do the Democrats have any planned action taken in light that we know that a lot of the police services, maybe the military and so, have been really infiltrated by a lot of these KKK people and so? What plan of action is there should this happen?
Yeah, Stanley, so let me answer two different things. First, there are plenty of folks, better pay grades than mine, very smart legal minds who have already been talking about this for months, a lot of progressive organizations that we're working with. So, there are plenty of contingency plans. The best way, though, to make sure we don't have to worry about any of those is we just beat him in a big way on November 3rd, right? And so that's the second part, which is take any anxiety or angst you might have over that and put all that energy into the next 19 days to helping on phone banks and in areas where they're actually knocking on doors or whatever can happen in your community. If you can get people out to vote so we can deliver that really big result because people agree with us on the issues, if they get out to vote, then we don't have to worry about almost any of those scenarios even being a possibility. So, yes, there are plenty of people who already have a lot of contingency plans in place, so don't worry about that, Stanley. But second, let's take all of that nervousness that we have about it and put it into energy, channel it into getting people out to vote, and then we're going to be in a better position to not have to worry about it on November 3rd.
Nikki in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I have a question regarding the Electoral College. I know that Biden right now in all the polls looks like he's winning, but that was kind of the same position that we were in last time. How does this time differ, or how does the Electoral College play in this time?
Yeah, so I think it is quite different from a lot of different metrics out there, right? Part of it is, I think last time a lot of people were afraid to say they're for Donald Trump, and they may not have been totally honest in the polling. Also, we have people who didn't get out to vote, which we're not, I think, having this time. We're noticing that people really want to get out and be heard. But don't forget now, if you're a Trumpite, you have your Chinese-made Make America Great Again cap. You're out there proud about who you are, and I think they're not lying to pollsters this time around. So I think we have much more accurate polling. Plus, we're seeing it state-specific. That's far more important than national numbers because of Electoral College. And in state-specific places like Wisconsin, where Donald Trump only won by 23,000 votes, we have a very different scenario, and we feel like we are in a much better spot. And I'm even looking at polling down ticket that's reinforcing that. So I think it's very different based on a number of metrics, but, and it's a big but, that's if people get out and vote. So they may be willing to vote for us, but if we don't get them out to vote, then that negates any advantage we have in a poll.
Bill in Clifton, New Jersey, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi. Just an aside, I found it amusing that John Marshall is still the longest-serving Supreme Court justice. You would think at his time, when he lived twice the age of everybody else, they would have put age limitations on the Supreme Court for him as an example. But what I'm really calling about is the House of Representatives has the power to rein in the Supreme Court, make them follow the judicial code that all federal judges have to follow. And otherwise, it's just been total corruption. Look at Clarence Thomas, whose wife, Ginny, was running a anti-Obamacare organization, and Clarence Thomas was ending up at these gatherings and things. And by the way, Ginny Thomas just came out and said that the Soros family is really running the Democrat Party, and she sounds like I don't know, Martha Mitchell or something. But anyway, you could easily do that. And the other thing is, because the Supreme Court should not be involved in the legislative branches, I would suggest that all Supreme Court judges over 70 be consigned to a separate organization that is attached to the legislature, who can say whether bills are passing without any bond or anything, can say whether those are constitutional, so that we don't have to go through the whole thing of an injured party coming before the Supreme Court after the fact to get rid of the law. Does that make sense?
Bill, you bring up some provocative ideas I'd want to think about a little more. However, I don't know if those are going to be at the core of what our problems are with the Supreme Court, which is the packing that's been going on by the Republicans, completely changing their word from 4 years ago and now pushing this newest nominee through. So I think we've got to focus on the big picture. There's always all kinds of interesting arcane things that we could consider, but I don't think they're going to impact things as big as the kind of changes we need to be looking at.
Ed in Belleville, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
If Joe Biden is elected and if the Democrats end up with majorities in the House and Senate, I think the first thing the Senate Democrats should do is immediately abolish the legislative filibuster. If they do that, then they can pass any legislation that they want that will help the country, like the $15 an hour minimum wage or anything else. If they don't, McConnell and the Republicans are just going to filibuster everything like they have in the past. Well, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, Ed, I think that's a great conversation point for the Senate to have, especially as they're pushing this last justice through, kind of going through completely the opposite of what they said before. That may very likely be something the Senate has to look at. I think the three things you're going to see between both houses and a president, probably moving pretty early. One is going to be a real COVID relief and a plan to get out any vaccine if we have it by then, which I think we will, according to Dr. Fauci, how we make sure people get that, especially people who need it most. Second, we invest in a big infrastructure package early on to get people back working. Third, pass H.R. 1, the good government bill, so that we can help every other bill not be influenced by special interests. I think those are the three big things we got to get done.
Man, that's a great agenda. 45 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Pocan's website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, like Representative Rep Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Bob in Park Ridge, New Jersey. Excuse me. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, how are you? Another call from the East Coast. Yeah, I just was wondering what you thought about this. As I was watching the hearings, something occurred to me, and I was wondering if you might feel the same way. If thanks were due to Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump for handing hours of free TV time over to some of the most impressive voices in the Democratic Party, so they could kind of make a closing case 3 weeks before the election, which I think may be why he jumped into this town hall tonight. I think they realized what they did. How do you feel about
I mean, I don't know how many people I haven't seen how many people are watching the hearings, although I think they're certainly seeing snippets at night. And you're right. I think there's been a lot of articulate cases made. Donald Trump, though, I mean, I don't put any connecting of dots of logic or brain processes to what he does. I think tonight his ego, he wants to get good ratings. So he's doing it at the exact same time as Joe Biden because it's kind of a fourth grade nah sort of move, right? And he loves the attention because he's a narcissist. I don't know if there's a greater, broader thinking to Donald Trump. This is when they should have had a debate, and instead he backed out of that because, again, he did so awfully after the first debate. But I don't know what is going to help Donald Trump at this point. I think it's going to be very difficult for him to somehow turn public opinion 3.75 years later. I think, though, the biggest issue still out there is people agree with us on the issues, but unless they vote, we don't win. So we have to get people out to vote. And if we get that done, doesn't matter what trick Donald Trump will do next, what COVID spreader event he will have next, none of those things will have the impact the same as us getting people out to vote.
Glenn in Kalama, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman, as a general matter, what holds more interest for a congressman, to become speaker or to become a senator?
Boy, I think that's a real question for individual members. I don't know. A lot of folks seem to want to run for the Senate and the House. A lot of colleagues of mine I see take that path. The speaker spot doesn't open up very often, right? Nancy was leader back way before I was in Congress, and she was the minority leader, and then now she's the speaker. So, those spots don't open up that much. And honestly, it's a tremendous amount of work to be the speaker, and not that many people are rushing in line to do a job like that because it's an incredible personal toll on people. So I don't know. I mean, I see some members also want to be governors in their states. I watch that. And then some of us just want to do our jobs and get progressive policy down. And I think especially members of the Progressive Caucus, because we're more team-oriented than individual sport-oriented. I mean, we're trying to get these big ideas to become a reality for the American people. So, I think a lot of people that I know just focus on what we can actually get done while they're in office.
You have arguably the most corrupt member of the Senate in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson. Are you thinking of running for his seat in a couple of years when he's up for re-election?
I think there are going to be a number of Democrats that are looking at it. Generally, if Joe Biden would win, that would be a bad year for Democrats, right? Especially in a purple state like Wisconsin. The difference is, I think, when we have a vaccine for COVID and we do a big infrastructure bill, I think 2022 might be a good year for Democrats. So I think there's a great chance we'll beat Ron Johnson, and I think we'll have plenty of people looking at it at the time.
Great. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So it turns out back in November, the spy agencies in the United States were notifying the Trump administration that something's going on in China. Looks like another SARS outbreak. Maybe we should get ready for this. It was ignored. I've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program that basically goes through the whole timeline, all the way from, actually going back to 2018 when Trump disbanded 3 different anti-pandemic agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, and the executive branch. Just closed them down, fired the people. That was the end of that. How he ignored the intelligence in November, he ignored the intelligence in December, he ignored the epidemic now coming into the United States in January, he ignored it in February, just going the blow-by-blow timeline. And I think it's really worth having it all in one place, a good recap, a good summary of this that you can refer to and you can share with your friends. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. David in Skagway, Alaska. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I'm sure most people have seen that interview with Nancy Pelosi and Wolf Blitzer by now, but I'm seeing that Rogue Khanna is kind of wanting to get stimulus out there now. So I'm curious if you could talk about the differences a little bit, but why Nancy Pelosi is hesitant and just some of the Republican faults in the bill. Thank you much.
Yeah, and I did a little bit of that earlier, David, but let me just say this. I think we all want to get a bill done right away, right? It's not just Roe, it's the entire caucus and the American people. The problem is Roe may not have all the information. He might have got a little ahead of himself in saying just grab the deal because it's a good number without knowing any of the details. And once you start talking to Nancy Pelosi, I literally have a 4-page summary of differences that I'm going through right now, where things that, families, lower income families with kids are going to be hurt. States that have gerrymandered legislatures who may not form a state compact then don't get testing dollars will be hurt. That's crazy. There's a bunch of language problems, and we've got to have the best possible bill that helps the most people. You can't avoid not having anything about evictions, right? So it's really what matters is what's in the deal, not exactly the dollar total, but what the details are. And I think, if you just said, look, people are hurting, we have to get money, that's every member of Congress, right? We all agree with that. And the public, I think, agrees with that. But what matters is what's actually in the detail. And sometimes you have to get those bits of information before you put out a tweet. And I think, after having several conversations with Speaker Pelosi, I am convinced that she's doing the right thing for all the right reasons. And I thought the interview was a bad interview, and I thought that was not good.
Yeah, agreed. Paul in Woodinville, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Pocan. This is my point. I favor eliminating the federal income tax. I think this is the way that Democrats could take vast majorities in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives, and this is why I'm saying it is clear that Judge Coney Barrett wants things to be fought on the state level, that being reproductive choice and same-sex marriage, many things that the Republicans have always pushed for states' rights. Okay, well, let's put your money where your mouth is. So my plan is this. You divide the federal budget into 538 shares, whatever that is, and the states, the state treasurers would collect taxes from their citizenry and pay whatever share of 538 your representation is. If Wisconsin has, 7 electoral votes or 7 representatives, 2 senators, and however many Congress representations, then you pay 7 times a share, which is the federal budget divided by 538. Let the states collect the taxes to pay to the federal government, and you're not going to see a big bloated federal budget. Of course, the federal government can levy other taxes, such as payroll taxes or other kinds of federal taxes. But I favor, if you want to fight on the state level, and let states like Wyoming, who have, 573,000 people in it, yet they have 3 electors, they have 2 senators and 1 Congress representative and 3 electoral votes. Let them start paying their fair damn share in taxes, which would be 3 times whatever 538 divided the federal budget by 5, 1 share of the federal budget. 3 times that is what they should pay. If they're going to have an overrepresentation in electoral votes, then let them pay their debt. That's direct representation. That's taxed by direct representation. There's no denying that. Your response.
Yeah, Paul, I see at least one real big problem with that is there's a lot of states that don't care about their citizenry. I mean, but gerrymandering and things, you could see legislatures not care about people of color, lower income folks, and others. They're just going to then take care of whatever special interest help put them in the legislatures. And I don't think you get a fair and equitable and just delivering of services. That's why many things are delivered at the national level. And, I think the real debate should be we've got to raise taxes on the wealthiest so that we can avoid the income inequality that we have in this country. I don't think you'll get that if you break it out to the state levels.
I think Paul was only pointing in one direction. He was saying no more federal income tax. All of the federal revenues are collected at, in other words, our state income tax here in Oregon would go from 4% or whatever it is up to 16% or 20%, but all the federal money coming down to the states would stay intact. What do you think of that? We have about a half a minute left, by the way.
Yeah, again, I think I still am having a little bit of a problem because the inequity I see in some of the gerrymandering on legislative levels. Like in Wisconsin, we didn't do Medicaid expansion. Look at the few states that didn't do it. Even, Republican states did it because it was good for their constituents. And some states were so political they didn't do it. And yet, it shouldn't matter what state you live in. You should have access to Medicaid if you're poor and you need it. So that would be my concern: is that would you lose some of the equity that I think we do have built in a federal system right now?
Yeah, makes sense. Congressman, real quick, what should we be looking for next week?
We've got 19 days to the election. We should all be really focused on that. Hopefully we'll get a COVID package yet. Again, what's important is the details of what's in the deal, not whatever the dollar figure is. It's important that you're covering as many people as possible. And, we'll watch the Supreme Court move forward.
There you go. Okay. Thank you, Congressman Mark Pocan. Thank you so much. Great talking with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down, and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day, how we've reincarnated Columbus Day, essentially. And I mentioned at the time that because of the hearings on the Supreme Court we would be moving that back till later in the week. And that's right now. That's this hour today. Robin Zephier is on the line with us. Robin is an attorney and the co-author of a book, Warrior Is, along with his brother Harley Zephier. WarriorIs.com is the website for the book. And Robin, welcome to the program. And thanks so much for writing this absolutely brilliant book. Tell us about your grandfather and General Custer.
Well, thank you, Tom, for inviting us. I'm kind of saddened that Harley, my brother, was not able to join us on this presentation. But yes, Tom, the book that we wrote was a work of love that has been in the process for generations. As you all know, there was a very important historical event that occurred back on June 25th, 1876, out on the Greasy Grass, along the Greasy Grass River at the Little Bighorn in Montana. However, that is only a part of our great-grandfather's life story. Tom, his name is Mato Niampi, which translated to English is Saved by Bear. And he's a Minikoju Lakota, which we are also. We come from the sacred lands of the Hisapa, the Black Hills of South Dakota. But one of the main drawing points of this story, the life story of our great-grandfather, was his confrontation, his one-on-one confrontation with Lieutenant Colonel George A. Custer back on that historical date. And I know that people that pick up the book and become interested in it, many times we recognize that their attractiveness, their interest in the story flows from the spiritual foundation of the story itself that emanates from the very land. People all across the world, when you hear them or you hear a reference to the Little Bighorn or Custer, they'll turn their heads, whether they're in Japan or Russia or India or South America, because it just has that type of a spiritual energy about it. And so we took this story that was passed down through generations in our family, through oral history mostly. And I would like to tell you about the event that basically gave us the spiritual permission to tell the story, if I could, Tom.
Sure, we have about 5.5 minutes left here, Robin. Go for it.
Okay. Well, my brother Harley, who is also my teacher, my mentor, he took a very sacred duty upon himself to prepare himself to be able to tell this story. And this was a lifelong commitment for him. So when he planned a ceremony that we held on September 29th, 2010, right there on Last Stand Hill out at the Greasy Grass. And during that ceremony, we were granted the spiritual permission to finally come forward and tell this story to the world. And it was held secret for approximately 141 years because we were advised through the generations and through the spiritual connection that we could not bring it forward until such time as we had this spiritual ceremony that would grant us a spiritual permission. And I remember during that particular ceremony, Tom, I was in the altar speaking to the Creator myself. And at that particular moment, I felt a spiritual energy move through my body. And I know who it was. I know it was my great-grandfather. But we had prayed there for the spirits of all those that were involved, all those that had passed, all those that were to come, be they warriors, be they the soldiers, even Custer himself, as well as the horses and all beings on that land.
That's remarkable. So what happened on that day 141 years ago?
Well, as you know, there was a movement of
genocide, the United States saw the Lakota people as being in the way of manifest destiny. And the main trigger of the purpose and the intent to remove us was to gain control of the Black Hills and the gold. And the warriors, including our great-grandfather, planned this out spiritually for over a year for this confrontation. And that's how we do things, Tom. And so when the confrontation was to come, there were spiritual messages sent that this could be worked out through diplomacy and peace. But should the moment come when the cavalry and Custer came to annihilate us and to remove us from Earth, we knew that we had to take a stand. And many times this story is referred to as Custer's last stand. Well, in a sense, it was a last stand, but truly it was ours, because it was our duty as the protectors of Unchi Maka, grandmother Earth, to survive and to basically set an example for all peoples across the world that they too can survive in their own way, because there are greasy grass battles all across the world and all across history. This was an important one because it was shown and it was prominently mentioned, and we are honored to be able to tell this story for our great-grandfather and our people.
We're talking with Robin Zephier, who, with his brother Harley, wrote the book Warrior Is, in large part about their great-grandfather who was at that battle. In the epilogue, you talk about the time of a healing circle. What do you mean by that, Robin?
Well, by the time you get to the epilogue, of course, you would have read all of the things going on, and we thought it was extremely important to connect the spiritual foundation of our great-grandfather's life as well as the people's lives to be able to adequately tell the story in a meaningful way. But when we get to the epilogue and we talk about the healing of the circle, there is a circle of life in all things in existence. And each being, not just human beings, but each being is a part of that circle. And the circle needs each part. And we have seen moments in our history where the circle has become broken or shattered. And the Greasy Grass Battle was one of those moments. We refer to it as a breaking of the world. But sometimes in human history, the circle needs to become broken so that we can see the broken pieces, to identify them and to be able to better fit them together. So when we talk about the healing of the circle, there are moments in time when all the circles of all the groups of peoples throughout the world reach out for each other, and they seek each other out to form the bigger circle. So that's what we mean with healing of the circle. In peace,
Robin, we just
unity,
have 15 seconds
love.
left. Do you think that we're at one of those moments right now?
I do, and we made a reference to this. There was a great article that was written by a friend of mine named Maren Chalupka. She wrote an article in the Warrior magazine. It's called Who a Warrior Is, and she made reference to our mention of this, that in fact there is a coming of this, and we can all take it to heart and do it if we're committed.
Marvelous. The book is Warrior Is. The author or co-author Robin Zephier, along with his brother Harley Zephier. And Warrior Is, WARRIORIS.com is the website. Robin, thanks so much for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
Thank you, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with news and your calls. And then we have a fascinating guest at the bottom of the hour, too. So stick with us. And welcome back. Susan in Hillsboro, Oregon. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I am connecting dots that I'm not seeing anyone else quite connecting, almost. The dots that I'm connecting is that what Trump really is doing is preparing all of us for herd immunity. And the reason why you want part of the plan is getting rid of Obamacare because it's going to be way too expensive. The government can't support that with herd immunity. So he gets rid of that. And I'm highly suspicious. I'm just connecting these dots, and I know it's probably dumb, but and Kamala Harris almost has it, but she's a human. She's going, and he wants to get rid of it in the middle of the pandemic. Well, absolutely, because he knows that it's too expensive. And then and I'm suspicious that he really was sick with all the people in the White House, because it's a way for him to say, it's no big deal. Don't focus on it. Look, I'm better than ever. And that reduces people's fear. And so then they're willing to go back to work, and they're willing to go back and open the schools and do all of this. This is why he's pulling back. He doesn't want to spend any money on giving people any financial relief, because we're all going to go back to work. And, and then that way the stock market will go up. People are making money. Yes, lots of people are going to get sick, but hey, we can't afford that anyway. I know this is sick, but he is a person. He's a person who does not think like the regular person. Right. Kamala Harris thinks like the rest of us.
Yeah, I think you're right, Susan. And your idea that one of the reasons he wants to destroy Obamacare is that he doesn't think the government, will be able to or should have to pay for health care for people who are caught up in this pandemic. And that's 8 million Americans now. It's 8.1 million Americans.
No,
makes
you got
a lot
it.
of sense.
You got it.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking.
Okay. I know when to understand mental illness, and they don't think, and they get away with it because they depend upon the rest of us thinking the way we think. And that's why he gets manipulate us.
Yeah. Here's the thing, though, Susan. Ever since President Obama humiliated him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and arguably even before that, but particularly ever since Obama humiliated him, he has been on an absolute crusade to destroy even the memory of Barack Obama in the United States, destroy every bit of his legacy. While I don't disagree with you that he's probably concerned about how much, COVID is going to cost the federal government, I think that his larger motive here is malice. This is a guy whose favorite meal is revenge. Don't you think?
Yeah. And he doesn't care how many people are going to die. They're going to die anyway, and he's overwhelmed by managing it. So why even try?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think
weird, somebody his age catching it, and he and Melania and none of the White House people seem to really be sick. So anyway. Yeah, well, they have access to drugs we don't have access to, and if you've got helicopters and private suites at major hospitals and a 20-doctor team, life is easier. Susan, thank you, and thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be short. David Korten, the guy who wrote When Corporations Rule the World, David and I will be having a conversation, a webinar conversation on October 15th from 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern Time about my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. Check it out. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation we're going to have. More information is available at thomhartmann.com and on our Facebook page. So here on the program recently, we had a fascinating conversation with Professor Richard Wolff about how banks have to keep basically 10% in reserve in case there's a run on the bank. Everybody wants their deposits back. The banks can lend out 90%, but they have to keep that 10% so they can pay you, give you your money back if you want it. Fannie and Freddie have a similar requirement in case mortgages go south. Mortgages did go south in 2008. Fannie and Freddie couldn't cover the shortfall. And as a result, they collapsed, and you and I had to pay $190 billion to bail them out. Well, back then, their reserve requirement was 45 cents on $100. Now it's 19 cents on $100.
Our special members-only riff you can find over at thomhartmann.com is all about this, what it means, where it could go, and what we can do about it. So check it out at thomhartmann.com.
And welcome back. Harry in Lompoc, California. Hey, Harry, what's up?
Hey, thank you, Mr. Hartmann, for taking my call. Mr. Zephier actually, I think, gave a philosophical basis for answering the question I'm going to ask you. The Progressive Party has put forward, the Green New Deal, or that's one that has been put forward. I was wondering, is there something analogous to that for our educational system within the Progressive Party?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, there's the general goal of strengthening public education and reversing the privatization of education, which is, what Republicans have been on a crusade about ever since Bill Bennett was put in as education secretary during the Reagan administration. But a Green New Deal version of it, I don't think so, Harry. Yeah, I mean, the unique thing about the Green New Deal is that it's manufacturing based. We're gonna be building highways. We're gonna be building infrastructure. The materials for that, the construction of that, the stuff that we're building itself, all is designed to have less of a carbon footprint than the infrastructure we have right now. Thus, green. I'm not sure exactly how you do that with education. You could certainly do that with school buildings. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm pretty much open, and again, like I mentioned about the last guest, with regards to a philosophical basis for our education, it seems to me that we have a lot of fear that's around learning, as opposed to the wonderment which so many of our really intelligent people who are, thinkers and whatever, physics or what have you, they seem to be unfettered by fear, and it's more the wonderment. I don't know how it is that we would have a comprehensive strategy that could deal with now and deal with the future and not be so easily perforated by political attacks, because the vehicle that we use in our activism to get kind of education rolling for our young people, we have to use politics in a lot of respects. And so
yeah,
I was just curious
Yeah, no, I get it, Harry. I would say, getting civics education and good science education into our schools would be at the top of that list. Eddie in Agra, Kansas. Hey, Eddie, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Again, I was just thinking again how we can pay for everybody to have a living wage and affordable health care, which I believe, affordable health care and a living wage and a decent house is right. But the way we can pay for this and not raise taxes is to tax the churches fairly.
Well, that's one way, and what boggles my mind, and I printed this story out. I haven't gotten to an opportunity to really talk about it, but there's a scandal that is being reported on either at the Post or the Times about this collection of right-wing groups who are all charities. We are subsidizing every one of them, and they are getting together and basically conspiring, how to steal elections and how to support Donald Trump, which is not allowed for charities. If you're a nonprofit, you're not supposed to be able to do that. So, I think that there's this is a really good time for us to be looking at the possibility of dealing with the tax code in that context. And spot on, Eddie. I'm with you. Thank you. David in Spotswood, David in Spotswood, New Jersey, you're on the air.
Hi. I haven't watched that much of the Supreme Court nomination, but what little I do is I hear the words legal process, or I don't have the information to answer the question. And what I wanted to suggest to the congressman or anybody out there that's listening is I think any time that the word's legal, that I can't answer the question because I would need to know the legal facts, is that there should be an immediate 2-week meeting of the Judiciary Committee to determine if the nominee should answer the question. But then by doing so, we could stall this nomination until February.
Yeah. It's number one, the rules are in the hands of the Republicans right now. They control a majority in the Senate, and so they get to decide what the rules are. Number two, I don't think that, outside of criminal procedures or maybe, well, even with a subpoena, you remember all those mob bosses back, in the 50s and 60s who were saying, I'm exercising my First Amendment right? I mean, Amy Coney Barrett does not have to answer any questions she doesn't want to answer. I don't think you can force her to.
Well, I'm just saying then maybe she should be disqualified when she uses the word that I would need to know what the legal process.
I think a lot of her answers were disqualifying yesterday. I'm with you. And I'm guessing that there's not going to be a single, and David, thank you for the call. I'm guessing there's not going to be a single Democrat voting for her. Because she was deceptive, she was evasive, and some of the things she did say were downright scary. So, there's a lot going on there that we need to be talking about. Up next, Gene Schroedel is going to be with us, and then after that, I'll be picking up your phone calls. We're going to be talking about voting in Indian country. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Gene is the author of a new book, Voting in Indian Country, The View from the Trenches. We'll be right back.
Today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space, Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, It is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyessa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn, a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, is tweeting about how it took 8 days for a member of her family to get a COVID test back, and during that time, that person, who it turns out was positive, they didn't know for 8 days, that person infected 3 other people in their family. Had they simply known, they could have quarantined that person. Even Mick Mulvaney, you know, right-wing crazy, former Tea Party congressman, you know, acolyte of the Koch brothers. Even Mick Mulvaney is saying this is unacceptable during the pandemic when his own kids couldn't get tested, or one of his kids. The other one got tested and it took 7 days to get the results back. He says this is unacceptable. We've got a whole video about why this is, where the ideology that's driving, this is beyond incompetence, this is actually ideological. A new video out about this for the supporters of our program. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. On the line with us is Gene Schroedel, the professor of public policy at Claremont Graduate University and author of a new book, Voting in Indian Country, The View from the Trenches. And Gene, welcome to the program. This is our Friday version of Monday's Indigenous People Day broadcast, as it were. And brilliant book. Could you start out by telling us about the legal status of Native peoples in the United States?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. Native Americans, like any other person born within the United States, is a citizen of the United States. What is different is that the individuals who also belong to the 574 federally recognized tribes also have a native citizenship. And that gives them what could be considered tripartite citizenship, because even though most of us are not aware of it, the rest of us have dual citizenship. We have national citizenship and we have state citizenship, and each one has different rights. And it's interesting because that was the distinction that was used in the 19th century to keep women from voting, because the argument was the right to vote is a right of state citizenship, not national citizenship. So I'm not Native. I have dual citizenship. Tom, if I'm guessing you're not Native, you probably also have dual citizenship. But they have tripartite. But they have the right to vote, or should have the same right to vote as any other citizen of this country.
And yet, one of the stories that we're hearing in this year of massive Republican voter suppression all across the country, every opportunity they have, every way they can do it. And in fact, I remember this in 2016 as well, requiring, for example, ID that has specific street names and numbers, where in many Native communities there are no numbers on the streets. There's historically, obviously, the Native Americans are the only people who have been subject to a massive 4-century-long genocide. You could say African Americans have been the victim of terrible stuff, and I think in many ways it qualifies as a genocide, but it was the official policy of the United States government to kill Indians, Native Americans, for centuries. And to what extent is it still the policy of this government not to allow Native Americans to vote, or more broadly, to have political power?
Well, I think you have to distinguish again between national and state. I mean, there are state governments and political jurisdictions with large Native populations absolutely have adopted laws and policies and procedures that will disenfranchise Native people. They do denial, dilution, suppression. And what's interesting is these things occur with other minority populations. But when you're talking about Native Americans, there are always some unique twists. You were mentioning a moment ago voter identification, which would require people to have residential street addresses. I mean, in 2018, the Supreme Court, 3 weeks before the general election, allowed North Dakota to put that into practice. And they would have, in one foul swoop, disenfranchised roughly 5,000 people, many of whom had voted in the primary. Fortunately for those of us on the other side from those folks, people worked very, very hard in that very short period of time, to create addresses using GIS for people. But there are other things related to voter ID. So, for example, one of the stories that I got for my book involved an elderly Navajo woman, and she did not speak much English, and she had voted all of her life. And when voter ID came in, she was being disenfranchised because she had always used her thumbprint to vote, to prove who she was. So she collected materials, went in to the Department of Motor Vehicles, showed them her Native Navajo Nation documentation that she had been born here, but she didn't have a birth certificate. And the DMV near the closest to where she lived, said, "Blanca, we don't issue identification." This elderly woman went back to the tribe. They contacted a lawyer. The lawyer went with her to the DMV. The DMV still refused, the local one. The lawyer then went with this woman to the main DMV office in Flagstaff. And again, they were turning her down, and the lawyer had to threaten legal action. And this is a poor elderly woman, and it took a lawyer to force the state of Arizona to give her the identification that she needed to vote. I mean, it's just, excuse me, I just think it's crazy.
Yeah, I'm with you. We're talking with Gene Schroedel, who is the author of a new book, Voting in Indian Country, The View from the Trenches. Gene, you just told one remarkable story. You note in your book that history is essentially a living force in the present for Native people. Can you expand on that? And if you have an example to share with us, we have about 3 minutes here until we hit a hard break.
Okay. I mean, it's a sense that these battles are still being fought. When you travel in places such as Montana or South Dakota or even Arizona, that history is right there. In many places, the off-reservation white communities will have annual reenactments of Custer's heroic last stand. You will have Wounded Knee. Wounded Knee is in South Dakota. It's the site of both the protests in the 70s, the occupation, but also of an egregious massacre. And the attempts to keep Native people in South Dakota from voting are extraordinary. South Dakota, for example, sent out to all registered voters applications to vote by mail. But they required that people have those either notarized or officially witnessed. South Dakota also has a law that says if you vote and are living someplace other than where you lived, when you registered and is on file, you can be convicted of a felony, which allows you to be imprisoned for up to 5 years, knowing full well that large portions of people on reservation do not have stable living arrangements. At one point, I saw data showing that about 40% of people on the Pine Ridge Reservation didn't have a stable home address. They were moving from one place to another. Well, you could be living across the street from where you were when you registered, and you could be charged with a felony offense in the state of South Dakota. But have I got enough time to tell a
When did they pass that law, Gene?
Oh, gosh. That was quite a while ago. That's not a new one.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. They also are extremely active in purging the voting rolls. So between 2016 and 2020, the Rosebud Sioux Reservation is Todd County, as opposed to Oglala Lakota County, which is where most of Pine Ridge is. Between 2016 and 2020, 27% of the voters on the Pine Ridge Reservation were purged from the county's voting rolls. 27%.
That is mind-boggling. And so they would have to re-register in order to vote.
Right, but
these are just
then again,
naked attempts to suppress the Indian vote, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. Or we think about voting by mail, which everybody thinks very important in the middle of the pandemic. But if you take, for example, the Navajo Nation Reservation, which is mostly in Arizona but cuts over into Utah and New Mexico, it is larger than the state of West Virginia. There is no home mail, residential mail delivery on the reservation. West Virginia has 725 post offices. On the Navajo Nation, there are only 40 places, and not all are post offices, where you can get mail or send mail.
Remarkable. Gene Schroedel, professor of public policy at Claremont Graduate University, the author of the new book, Voting in Indian Country, The View from the Trenches. Gene, thanks for dropping by and sharing this with us.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good talking with you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the sane among us, trying to keep us all sane here. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Damon in Denver. Hey, Damon, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You made the point last week about Amy Coney Barrett about this theory, this theory about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments not being valid. And
legitimate is the word she used. Yeah.
Legitimate, yes. Okay. And I listened to a lot of her testimony yesterday and the day before yesterday, and I certainly heard a lot which was disturbing, but I didn't hear any Democrats raise that with her. And I'm wondering...
Yeah, nobody brought it up, which surprised me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I certainly would have liked to have heard what she had to say if someone had posed the question to her.
I would too. I absolutely would too, Damon. There were a lot of questions, and I think that in some ways some of the Democrats anyway missed an opportunity to talk about the Democratic platform and what's going on. I mean this nomination is something that they're not going to be able to stop, so they could have used that time to do pretty much anything they wanted, and I think they should have been making a pitch for vote for Democrats right now, particularly like Jamie Harrison against Lindsey Graham. But it is what it is. Damon, thanks for the call. Diane in Fort Lauderdale. Hey, Diane, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. So here's my question, and I think you might have touched on it before, but I want you to expound on that. If the man if President Jazz Hands goes to jail, does he still get benefits, and does his family still get benefits like his pension and protection and all that stuff? Does he still get taxpayer-funded protection and money and pension?
I believe so. I think that my record, and the reason why I think so is I remember a conversation about this back in the 70s when Nixon resigned, where the reporting was that had he been impeached, he would have lost his pension. But because he resigned instead of being impeached, he didn't lose his pension. Whether, when Trump leaves office, he's going to have this pension for life, he's going to have health care for life, he's going to have Secret Service protection for life. And
but he's going
I
to
don't
jail.
think that any of those benefits go away if he's convicted of a state crime. He may be, it may be that the feds will go after him. I would be surprised, frankly, because I don't think that Joe Biden or the Democrats are going to want to start a precedent of presidents putting former presidents in jail. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if he faces serious criminal charges in New York State, where Letitia James is going after him like there's no tomorrow, or Cy Vance in New York City, the DA there. And I don't think that his being convicted in state court would blow up his federal pension. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm not.
I hope you can get somebody to clear that up, because, this is where we are now. But thank you, Tom.
Yeah, it is. Thank you, Diane. I mean, isn't it amazing that we're sitting here having actual thoughtful conversations about the President of the United States going to prison? It's for the second time in my lifetime. It's like Richard Nixon the first. Well, and also there was the conversation about George W. Bush and Dick Cheney going to prison if the International Criminal Court in The Hague went after them for lying into the war in Iraq that led to hundreds of thousands of human deaths. But they just pulled us out of the court, so that never happened. On the Science Revolution, Dr. Justin Frank drops by on the current assessment of Trump's mental state. Meteorologist Dr. Jeff Masters will tell us about 2020's record-breaking hurricane season and how a hurricane can go from 40 to 110 miles an hour in just 24 hours. Tanya Sanarab from the Center for Biological Diversity is reporting on how massive wildlife imports are upping our future pandemic risk. Dr. Sam Metz is here on Medicare for All. He confirms a single payer provides better care for less money. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a reminder, in 40 minutes or thereabouts, 39 minutes, David Korten and I will be doing a webinar on my new book, The Hidden History of monopoly, American monopoly, how big business destroyed the American dream. You can find information about how to check in on that over at thomhartmann.com. Randy in Twinsburg, Ohio. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. First-time caller, and I've listened to you off and on for several years now, and I appreciate your candor, your truth, and I just want to bring a point. The voter suppression. I was listening to the piece that's happening on the reservation, et cetera, throughout, and that voter registration, that suppression is happening throughout the country. And Tom, it's late right now for this election, but I think there needs to be a coalition of some sort put together to come to the truth about all people. Now, I'm a black man with roots that are, I'm going to say Indian, but the real term is indigenous. The truth of the color of skin as it relates to people, if you go to the ship logs of many of those colonizers and how they described the color and the tint of the people, swarthy, tawny, and I think you got some knowledge about that. That wasn't a very fair-skinned person. My point is that there's voter suppression happening with black people. Why don't someone of your stature and others come together with all of us that are indigenous and begin to deal with this country and its desperate attempt to keep us down? All right, does that make sense to you where I'm coming from?
It does, Randy, and hopefully that's the Democratic Party. I mean, the Democratic Party has become a coalition that is, welcoming of a whole wide range of minorities, from gender minorities to racial minorities to religious minorities, and that's, I think, a good and healthy thing. And then there's a fair number of people who are, quote, the majority who are part of it as well. And that ideally is your coalition. I'm not really in a position to start a new organization or anything. It's not where I'm at in my life and the work that I'm doing. But I totally get what you're saying, Randy, and I think that I think it's a great suggestion. Randy, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's a thought-provoking suggestion. Daryl in Denville, New Jersey. Hey, Daryl, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Good. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hey, I actually, after listening to Sheldon Whitehouse's presentation about these groups, many of them that were flagged during Lois Lerner's tenure at the IRS, which is probably why they hated her so much. But listen to him describe that and the way that the Koch brothers and this Bradley Foundation and Donors Trust are basically controlling the entire country. These 300 judges on the federal bench, they're all bought and paid for. And I mean, and Whitehouse, he made that clear. But what that leads me to think, though, Tom, is it's more than just the issue of a woman's right to choose or gay marriage. It's really whether we're going to even have a constitutional democracy. I mean,
I agree. The real agenda here, Daryl, and this is what Sheldon Whitehouse was saying, is the real agenda is cementing corporate power and billionaire power in America. And the Republican Party, this is the core of their agenda and has been since 1980. And they bring along white people who are racists and men who are misogynists and guys with erectile dysfunction who are gun obsessed. They bring along these other groups in order to get enough people to get elected. But their real agenda is cementing the economic and political power of giant corporations and the billionaires that those corporations create. Period. Full stop.
Before I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have got to have, there has to be some institutionalists on that Supreme Court. I mean, otherwise the court is no longer legitimate. I mean, even people who might agree with Amy Coney Barrett have to recognize how she got there and what this will mean for the court going forward. And they have to be patriots and think about what this really means.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath, Daryl. I am with you that the court is badly corrupted, and this is an example of it. But not holding my breath. Bill in Crystal Lake, a little less than a minute, Bill, until the end of the show. What's up?
Yeah, this is a quickie, Tom. I just have a suggestion. Watching the news yesterday, there was people in line lined up forever and signs saying no public restrooms available. And I mentioned to my wife, she thought it was a good idea that I call you about the fact that people, when they go vote and stand in line, bring somebody else with you, a neighbor, friend, relative. And so one can hold the place while the other one goes to find a restroom, and then take turns that way. And when it's time and you're at the front, go for it and vote. But people who go singly with no one else and they got to go to the bathroom and get out of line, they may lose their spot and then give up.
Yeah, I've even heard stories of people wearing adult diapers, to go to vote. I mean, it's that bad. So, Bill, that's a great suggestion. Bring somebody with you who can hold your place in line. Bill, thank you. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Tomorrow will be Anything Goes Friday. We're going to have a great day. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Go to iwillvote.com, check your voter registration. In many states, you can actually check and see if you've mailed in a ballot, if it's been recorded yet. So lots of great stuff there, and be sure to, wake up your friends, right? Get out there and vote. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.